Chapter 5. Changes in sleep across the lifespan. Sleep before birth. Through speech or song, expecting parents will often thrill at their ability to elicit small kicks and movements from their in utero child. Though you should never tell them this, the baby is most likely fast asleep. Prior to birth, a human infant will spend almost all of its time in sleep-like state, much of which resembles the REM sleep state. The sleeping fetus is therefore unaware of its parents' performative machinations. Any co-occurring arm flicks and leg bobs that the mother feels from her baby are most likely to be the consequence of random bursts of brain activity that typify REM sleep. Adults do not, or at least should not, throw out similar nighttime kicks and movements, since they are held back by the body-paralyzing mechanism of REM sleep. But in utero, the immature fetus's brain has yet to construct the REM sleep muscle inhibiting system adults have in place. Other deep centers of the fetus brain have, however, already been glued in place, including those that generate sleep. Indeed, by the end of the second trimester of development, approximately week 23 of pregnancy, the vast majority of the neural dials and switches required to produce NREM and REM sleep have been sculpted out and wired up. As a result of this mismatch, the fetus brain still generates formidable motor commands during REM sleep, except there is no paralysis to hold them back. Without restraint, those commands are freely translated into frenetic body movements felt by the mother as acrobatic kicks and featherweight punches. At this stage of in utero development, most of the time is spent in sleep. The 24-hour period contains a mismatch of approximately 6 hours of NREM sleep, 6 hours of REM sleep, and 12 hours of an intermediary sleep state that we cannot confidently say is REM or NREM sleep, but certainly is not full wakefulness. It is only when the fetus enters the final trimester that the glimmers of real wakefulness emerge, far less than you would probably imagine, though just 2 to 3 hours of each day are spent awake in the womb. Even though total sleep time decreases in the last trimester, a paradoxical and quite ballistic increase in REM sleep time occurs. In the last 2 weeks of pregnancy, the fetus will ramp up in its consumption of REM sleep to almost 9 hours a day. In the last week before birth, REM sleep amount hits a lifetime high of 12 hours a day. With near insatiable appetite, the human fetus therefore doubles its hunger for REM sleep just before entering the world. There will be no other moment during the life of an individual, prenatal, early postnatal, adolescence, adulthood, or old age, when they will undergo such a dramatic change in REM sleep need or feast so richly on the stuff. Is the fetus actually dreaming when in REM sleep? Probably not in the way most of us conceptualize dreams, but we do know that REM sleep is vital for promoting brain maturation. The construction of a human being is in the womb occurs in distant, interdependent stages, a little bit like building a house. You cannot crown a house with a roof before there are supporting wall frames to rest it on, and you cannot put up walls without a foundation to seat them in. The brain, like the roof of a house, is one of the last items to be constructed during development, and like a roof, there are sub-stages to that process. You need a roof frame before you can start adding roof tiles, for instance. Detailed creation of the brain and its component parts occurs at a rapid rate during the second and third trimesters of human development, precisely the time window when REM sleep amounts skyrockets. This is no coincidence. REM sleep acts as an electrical fertilizer during this critical phase of early life. Dazzling bursts of electrical activity during REM sleep stimulates the lush growth of neural pathways all over the developing brain, and then furnish each with a healthy bouquet of connecting ends or synaptic terminals. Think of REM sleep like an internet service provider that populates new neighborhoods of the brain with vast networks of fiber optic cables. Using these inaugural bolts of electricity, REM sleep then activates their high-speed functioning. This phase of development, which infuses the brain with masses of neural connections, is called synaptogenesis, as it involves the creation of millions of wiring links or synapses between neurons. By deliberate design, it is another enthusiastic first pass at setting up the mainframe of a brain. There is a great deal of redundancy, offering many possible circuit configurations to emerge within the infant's brain once born. From the perspective of the Internet service provider analogy, all homes across all neighborhoods throughout all territories of the brain have been gifted a high degree of connectivity and bandwidth in this first phase of life. Charged with such a Herculean task of neural architecture, establishing the neural highways and side streets that will engender thoughts, memories, feelings, decisions, and action, it's no wonder REM sleep must dominate most, if not all, of early developmental life. In fact, this is true for all other mammals. The time of life when REM sleep is greatest is the same stage when the brain is undergoing the greatest construction. Warrenly, if you disturb or impair the REM sleep of a developing infant's brain pre or early postpartum, and there are consequences. In the 1990s, researchers began studying newly born rat pups. Simply by blocking REM sleep, their gestational progress was retarded. Despite chronological time marching on, the two should of course progress in unison. Depriving the infant rats of REM sleep stalled construction of their neural rooftop, the cerebral cortex of the brain. Without REM sleep, assembly work on the brain ground to a halt, frozen in time by the experimental wedge of a lack of REM sleep. Day after day, the half-finished roof line of the sleep-starved cerebral cortex shows no growth change. The very same effect has now been demonstrated in numerous other mammalian species, suggesting that the effect is probably common across mammals. When the infant rat pups were finally allowed to get some REM sleep, assembly of the cerebral rooftop did restart, but it didn't accelerate, nor did it ever fully get back on track. An infant's brain without sleep will be a brain ever under-constructed. A more recent link with deficient REM sleep concerns autism spectrum disorder, ASD, not to be confused with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, which we will discuss later in the book. Autism, of which there are several forms in a neurological condition that emerges early in development, usually around 2 or 3 years of age, the core symptom of autism is a lack of social interaction. Individuals with autism do not communicate or engage with other people easily or typically. Our current understanding of what causes autism is incomplete, but central to the condition appears to be an inappropriate wiring up of the brain during early developmental life, especially in the formation and number of synapses. That is, abnormal synaptogenesis, imbalances in synaptic connections are common in autistic individuals. Excess amounts of connectivity in some parts of the brain, deficiencies in others. Realizing this, scientists have begun to examine whether the sleep of individuals with autism is atypical. It is. Infants and young children who show signs of autism or who are diagnosed with autism do not have normal sleep patterns or amounts. The circadian rhythms of autistic children are also weaker than their non-autistic counterparts, showing a flatter profile of melatonin across the 24-hour period rather than a powerful rise in concentration at night and rapid fall throughout the day. Biologically, it is as if the day and night are far less light and dark respectively. For autistic individuals, as a consequence, there is a weaker signal for when stable, wake, and solid sleep should take place. Additionally, and perhaps related, the total amount of sleep that autistic children can generate is less than that of non-autistic children. Most notable, however, is the significant shortage of REM sleep. Autistic individuals show a 30 to 50% deficit in the amount of REM sleep they obtain relative to children without autism. Considering the role of REM sleep in establishing the balanced mass of synaptic connections within the development brain, there is now keen interest in discovering whether or not REM sleep deficiencies is a contributing factor to autism. Existing evidence in humans is simply correlational. However, just because autism and REM sleep abnormalities go hand in hand does not mean that one causes the other, nor does this association tell you the direction of causality even if it does exist. Is deficient REM sleep causing autism, or is it the other way around? It is curious to note, however, that selectively depriving an infant rat of REM sleep leads to aberrant patterns of neural connectivity or synaptogenesis in the brain. Moreover, rats deprived of REM sleep during infancy go on to become socially withdrawn and isolated as adolescents and adults. Irrespective of causality issues, tracking sleep abnormalities represents a new diagnostic hope for the early detection of autism. Of course, no expecting mother has to worry about scientists disrupting the REM sleep of their developing fetus, but alcohol can inflict that same selective removal of REM sleep. Alcohol is one of the most powerful suppressors of REM sleep that we know of. We will discuss the reason that alcohol blocks REM sleep generation and the consequences of that sleep disruption in adults in later chapters. For now, however, we'll focus on the impact of alcohol on the sleep of a developing fetus and newborn. Alcohol consumed by the mother readily crosses the placental barrier and therefore readily infuses her developing fetus. Knowing this, scientists first examined the extreme scenario: mothers who were alcoholics or heavy drinkers during pregnancy. Soon after birth, the sleep of these neonates was assessed using electrodes gently placed on the head. Newborns of heavy drinking mothers spend far less time in the active state of REM sleep compared with infants of similar age, but who were born of mothers who did not drink during pregnancy. The recording electrodes went on to point out an even more concerning physiological story. Newborns of heavy drinking mothers did not have the same electrical quality of REM sleep. You will remember from chapter 3 that REM sleep is exemplified by delightfully chaotic or desynchronized brainwaves, a vivacious and healthy form of electrical activity. However, the infants of heavy drinking mothers showed a 200% reduction in this measure of vibrant electrical activity relative to the infants born of non-alcohol consuming mothers. Instead, the infants of heavy drinking mothers emitted a brainwave pattern that was far more sedentary in this regard. If you are now wondering whether or not epidemiological studies have linked alcohol use during pregnancy to an increased likelihood of neuropsychiatric illness in the mother's child, including autism, the answer is yes. Fortunately, most mothers these days do not drink heavily during pregnancy. But what about the more or common situation of an expectant mom having an occasional glass or two of wine during pregnancy? Using non-invasive tracking of heart rate together with ultrasound measures of body, eye, and breathing movements, we are now able to determine the basic stages of NREM sleep and REM sleep of a fetus when it is the one. Equipped with these methods, a group of researchers studied the sleep of babies who were just weeks away from being born. Their mothers were assessed on 2 successive days. On one of those days, the mothers drank non-alcoholic fluids. On the other day, they drank approximately 2 glasses of wine. The absolute amounts was controlled on the basis of their body weight. Alcohol significantly reduced the amount of time that the unborn babies spent in REM sleep relative to the non-alcohol condition. That alcohol also damped the intensity of REM sleep experienced by the fetus, defined by the standard measure of how many darting rapid eye movements are during the REM sleep cycle. Furthermore, these unborn infants suffered a marked depression in breathing during REM sleep, with breath rates dropping from a normal rate of 381 per hour during natural sleep to just 4 per hour when the fetus was enmeshed with alcohol. Beyond alcohol, abstinence during pregnancy, the time window of nursing also warrants mention. Almost half of all lactating women in Western countries consume alcohol in the months during breastfeeding. Alcohol is readily absorbed in a mother's milk. Concentrations of alcohol in breast milk closely resemble those in a mother's bloodstream. A 0.08 blood alcohol level in a mother will result in approximately a 0.008 alcohol level in breast milk. Recently, we have discovered what alcohol in breast milk does to the sleep of an infant. Newborns will normally transition straight into REM sleep after a feeding. Many mothers already know this almost as soon as suckling stops, and sometimes even before. The infant's eyelids will close. Underneath, the eyes will begin darting left-right, indicating that their baby is now being nourished by REM sleep. One common myth was that babies sleep better if the mother has had an alcoholic drink before a feeding. Beer was the suggested choice of beverage in this old tale. For those of you who are beer lovers, unfortunately, it is just that, a myth. Several studies have fed infants breast milk containing either a non-alcoholic flavor such as vanilla or a controlled amount of alcohol, the equivalent of a mother having a drink or two. When babies consume alcohol-laced milk, their sleep is more fragmented, they spend more time awake, and they suffer a 20 to 30% suppression of REM sleep soon after. Often, the babies will even try to get back some of that missing REM sleep once they have cleared it from their bloodstream, though it is not easy for their fledgling systems to do so. What emerges from all of these studies is that REM sleep is not optional during early human life, but obligatory. Every hour of REM sleep appears to count, as evidenced by the desperate attempt by a fetus or newborn to regain any REM sleep when it is lost. Sadly, we do not yet fully understand what the long-term effects are of fetal or neonate REM sleep disruption, alcohol triggered or otherwise. Only that blocking or reducing REM sleep in newborn animals hinders and distorts brain development, leading to an adult that is socially abnormal. Childhood sleep. Perhaps the most obvious and tormenting for new parents difference between the sleep of infants and young children and that of adults is the number of slumber phases. In contrast to the single, monophasic sleep pattern observed in adults of industrialized nations, infants and young kids display polyphasic sleep, many short snippets of sleep through the day and nights, punctuated by numerous awakenings, often vocal. There is no better or more humorous affirmation of this fact than the short book of lullabies written by Adam Mansbach, entitled "Go the F.K. to Sleep." Obviously, it's an adult book. At the time of writing, Mansbach was a new father, and like many new parents, he was enraged by the constant awakening of his child, the polyphasic profile of infant sleep, the incessant need to attend to his young daughter, helping her fall back to sleep and time again, night after night after night, left him utterly exasperated. It got to the point where Mansbach just had to vent all the loving rage he had spent up. What came spilling out onto the page was a comedic splash of rhymes he would fictiously read to his daughter, the themes of which will immediately resonate with many new parents. "I'll read you one very last book if you swear. You'll go the F to sleep. I implore you to listen to the audiobook version of the work, narrated to perfection by the sensational actor Samuel L. Jackson." Fortunately for all new parents, Mansbach included, the older a child gets, the fewer, longer, and more stable their sleep bouts become. Explaining this change is the circadian rhythm. While the brain areas that generate sleep are molded in place well before birth, the master 24-hour clock that controls the circadian rhythm, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, takes considerable time to develop. Not until age 3 or 4 months will a newborn show modest signs of being governed by a daily rhythm. Slowly, the suprachiasmatic nucleus begins to latch on to repeating signals, such as daylight, temperature change, and feeding, so long as those feedings are highly structured, establishing a stronger 24-hour rhythm. By the 1-year milestone of development, the suprachiasmatic nucleus clock of an infant has gripped the steering reins of the circadian rhythm. This means that the child now spends more of the day awake, interspersed with several naps, and mercifully more of the night asleep. Mostly gone are the indiscriminate bouts of sleep and wake that once peppered the day and night. By 4 years of age, the circadian rhythm is in dominant command of a child's sleepy behavior, with a lengthy slab of nighttime sleep, usually supplemented by just a single daytime nap. At this stage, the child has transitioned from a polyphasic sleep pattern to a biphasic sleep pattern. Come late childhood, the modern monophasic pattern of sleep is finally made real. What these progressive establishments of stable rhythmicity hides, however, is a much more tumultuous power struggle between NREM and REM sleep. Although the amount of total sleep gradually declines from birth onwards, all the while becoming more stable and consolidated, the ratio of time spent in NREM sleep and REM sleep does not decline in a similarly stable manner. During the 14 hours of a total shut-eye per day that a 6-month-old infant obtains, there is a 50-50 times share between NREM and REM sleep. A 5-year-old, however, will have a 70-30 split between NREM and REM sleep across the 11 hours of total daily slumber. In other words, the proportion of REM sleep decreases in early childhood while the proportion of NREM sleep actually increases. Even though total sleep time decreases, the downgrading of the REM sleep proportion and the upswing in REM sleep and REM sleep dominance continues throughout early and mid-childhood. That balance will finally stabilize to an 80-20 REM sleep split by the late teen years and remain so throughout early and mid-adulthood. Sleep and adolescence. Why do we spend so much time in REM sleep in the womb and early in life, yet switch to a heavier dominance of deep and REM sleep in late childhood and early adolescence? If we quantify the intensity of deep sleep brainwaves, we see the very same pattern, a decline in REM sleep intensity in the first year of life, yet an exponential rise in deep and REM sleep intensity in mid and late childhood, hitting a peak just before puberty and then damping back down. What's so special about this type of deep sleep at this transitional time of life? Prior to birth and soon after, the challenge of our development was to build and add vast numbers of neural highways and interconnections that become a flat gangrene. As we have discussed, REM sleep plays an essential role in this proliferation process, helping to populate brain neighborhoods with neural connectivity, and then activate those pathways with a healthy dose of informational bandwidth. But since this first round of brain wiring is purposefully overzealous, a second round of remodeling must take place. It does so during late childhood and adolescence. Here, the architectural call is not to scale up, but to scale back for the goal of efficiency and effectiveness. The time of adding brain connections with the help of REM sleep is over. Instead, pruning of connections becomes the order of the day, or should I say night. Enter the sculpting hand of deep and REM sleep. Our analogy of the internet service provider is a helpful one to return to. When first setting up a network, each home in the newly built neighborhood was given an equal amount of connectivity, bandwidth, and thus potential for use. However, that's an inefficient solution for the long term, since some of these homes will become heavy bandwidth users over time, while other homes will consume very little. Some homes may even remain vacant and never use any bandwidth. So, to reliably estimate what pattern of demand exists, the internet service provider needs time to gather usage statistics. Only after a period of experience can the provider make an informed decision on how to refine the original network structure put in place, dialing back connectivity to low-use homes while increasing connectivity to other homes with high bandwidth demand. It is not a complete redo of the network, and much of the original structure will remain in place. After all, the internet service provider has done this many times before, and they have a reasonable estimate of how to build a first pass of the network. But a use-dependent reshaping and downsizing must still occur if maximum network efficiency is to be achieved. The human brain undergoes a similar, use-determined transformation during late childhood and adolescence. Much of the original structure laid down early in life will persist, since Mother Nature has by now learned to create a quite accurate first-pass wiring of a brain after billions of attempts over many thousands of years of evolution. But she wisely leaves something on the table in her genetic brain sculpture, that of individualized refinement. The unique experiences of a child during their formative years translates to a set of personal usage statistics. Those experiences or those statistics provide the bespoke blueprints for a last round of brain refinement, capitalizing on the opportunity left open by nature. A somewhat genetic brain becomes either ever more individualized, based on the personalized use of the owner. To help with the job of refinement and downscaling of connectivity, the brain employs the services of deep and REM sleep. Of the many functions carried out by deep and REM sleep, the full roster of which we will discuss in the next chapter, it is that of synaptic pruning that features prominently during adolescence. In a remarkable series of experiments, the pioneer sleep researcher Erwin Feyberg discovered something fascinating about how this operation of downscaling takes place within the adolescent brain. His findings help justify an opinion you may also hold. Adolescents have a less rational version of an adult's brain, one that takes more risks and has relatively poor decision-making skills. Using electrodes placed all over the head, front and back, left side and right, Feinberg began recording the sleep of a large group of kids starting at age 6 to 8 years old. Every 6 to 12 months, he would bring these individuals back to his laboratory and perform another sleep measurement. He didn't stop for 10 years. He amassed more than 3,500 all-night assessments, a scarcely believable 320,000 hours of sleep recordings. From these, Feybrink created a series of snapshots depicting how deep sleep intensity changed with the stages of brain development as the children made their often awkward transition through adolescence into adulthood. It was the neuroscience equivalent of time-lapse photography in nature, taking repeat pictures of a tree as it first comes into bud in the spring, babyhood, then bursts into leaf during the summer, late childhood, then matures in color come the fall, early adolescence, and finally sheds its leaves in the winter, late adolescence, and early adulthood. During mid and late childhood, Feyberg observed moderate deep sleep amounts as the last neural growth spurts inside the brain were being completed, analogous to late spring and early summer. Then Feyberg began seeing a sharp rise in deep sleep intensity in his electrical recordings, right at the time when the development needs of brain connectivity switched from growing connections to shedding them. The tree's equivalent of fall. Just as maturational fall was about to turn to winter, and the shedding was nearly complete. Feinberg's recordings showed a clear ramping back down in deep and REM sleep intensity to lower intensity once more. The life cycle of childhood was over, and as the last leaf drops, the onward neural passage of these teenagers had been secured. Deep and REM sleep had aided their transition into early adulthood. Feinberg proposed that the rise and fall of deep sleep intensity were helping lead the maturational journey through the precarious heights of adolescence, followed by safe onward passage into adulthood. Recent findings have supported this theory. As deep and REM sleep performs its final overhaul and refinement of the brain during adolescence, cognitive skills, reasoning, and critical thinking start to improve, and do so in a proportional manner with that and REM sleep change. Taking a closer look at the timing of this relationship, you see something even more interesting. The changes in deep and REM sleep always precede the cognitive and developmental milestones within the brain by several weeks or months, implying a direction of influence. Deep sleep may be a driving force of brain maturation, not the other way around. Feinberg made a second seminal discovery when he examined the timeline of change in deep sleep intensity at each different electrode spot on the head. It was not the same. Instead, the rise and fall pattern of maturation always began at the back of the brain, which performs the functions of visual and spatial perception, and then progressed steadily forward as adolescence progressed. Most striking, the very last stop on the maturational journey was the tip of the frontal lobe, which enables rational thinking and critical decision making. Therefore, the back of the brain of an adolescent was more adult-like, while the front of the brain remained more childlike at any one moment during this developmental window of time. His findings helped explain why rationality is one of the last things to flourish in teenagers, as it is the last brain territory to receive sleep's maturational treatment. Certainly, sleep is not the only factor in the ripening of the brain, but it appears to be a significant one that paves the way to mature thinking and reasoning ability. Feinberg's study reminds me of a billboard advertisement I once saw from a large insurance firm, which read, "Why do most 60-year-olds drive like they're missing part of their brain? Because they are." It takes deep sleep and developmental time to accomplish the neural maturation that blocks with brain gap within the frontal lobe. When your children finally reach their mid-20s and your car insurance premium drops, you can thank sleep for the savings. The relationship between deep sleep intensity and brain maturation that Feinberg described has now been observed in many different populations of children and adolescents around the world. But how can we be sure that deep sleep truly offers a neural pruning service necessarily for brain maturation? Perhaps changes in sleep and brain maturation simply occur at roughly the same time but are independent of each other. The answer is found in studies of juvenile rats and cats at the equivalent stage to human adolescence. Scientists deprive these animals of deep sleep. In doing so, they halt the maturational refinement of brain connectivity, demonstrating a causal role for deep and REM sleep in propelling the brain into healthy adulthood. Of concern is that administering caffeine to juvenile rats will also disrupt deep and REM sleep, and as a consequence delay numerous measures of brain maturation and the development of social activity, independent grooming, the exploration of the environment, measures of self-motivated learning. Recognizing the importance of deep and REM sleep in teenagers has been instrumental to our understanding of healthy development, but it has also offered clues as to what happens when things go wrong in the context of abnormal development. Many of the major psychiatric disorders, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression, and ADHD, are now considered disorders of abnormal development, since they commonly emerge during childhood and adolescence. We will return to the issue of sleep and psychiatric illness several times in the course of this book, but schizophrenia deserves special mention at this juncture. Several studies have tracked neural development using brain scans every couple of months in hundreds of young children as they made their way through adolescence. A proportion of these individuals went on to develop schizophrenia in their late teenage years and early adulthood. Those individuals who developed schizophrenia had an abnormal pattern of brain maturation that was associated with synaptic pruning, especially in the frontal lobe regions where rational, logical thoughts are controlled. The inability to do so being a major symptom of schizophrenia. In a separate series of studies, we have also observed that in young individuals who are at high risk of developing schizophrenia, and in teenagers and young adults with schizophrenia, there is 2 to 3-fold reduction in deep and REM sleep. Furthermore, the electrical brain waves of NREM sleep are not normal in their shape or number in the affected individuals. Faulty pattern of brain connections in schizophrenia caused by sleep abnormalities is now one of the most active and exciting areas of investigation in psychiatric illness. Adolescents face 2 other harmful challenges in their struggle to obtain sufficient sleep as their brains continue to develop. The first is a change in their circadian rhythm. The second is early school start times. I will address the harmful and life-threatening effects to the later in a later chapter. However, the complications of early school start times are inextricably linked with the first issue, a shift in circadian rhythm. As young children, we often wished to stay up late so we could watch television or engage with parents and older siblings in whatever it was that they were doing at night. But when given that chance, sleep would usually get the better of us, on the couch, in a chair, or sometimes flat out the floor. We'd be carried to bed, slumbering and unaware by those older siblings or parents who would stay awake. The reason is not simply that children need more sleep than their older siblings or parents, but also that the circadian rhythm of a young child runs on an earlier schedule. Children therefore become sleepy earlier and wake up earlier than their adult parents. Adolescent teenagers, however, have a different circadian rhythm from their young siblings. During puberty, the timing of the suprachiasmatic nucleus is shifted progressively forward, a change that is common across all adolescents, irrespective of culture or geography. So far forward, in fact, that it passes even the timing of their adult parents. As a 9-year-old, the circadian rhythm would have the child asleep by around 9 p.m., driven in part by the rising tide of melatonin at this time in children. By the time that the same individual has reached 16 years of age, their circadian rhythm has undergone a dramatic shift forward in its cycling phase. The rising tide of melatonin and the destruction of darkness and sleep in many hours away. As a consequence, the 16-year-old will usually have no interest in sleeping at 9 p.m. Instead, peak wakefulness is usually still in play at that hour. By the time the parents are getting tired as their circadian rhythms take a downturn, the melatonin release instructs sleep, perhaps around 10 or 11 p.m. Their teenage can still be wide awake. A few more hours must pass before the circadian rhythm of a teenage brain begins to shut down alertness and allow for easy sound sleep to begin. This, of course, leads to much angst and frustration for all parties involved on the back end of sleep. Parents want their teenage to be wake at a reasonable hour of the morning. Teenagers, on the other hand, having only been capable of initiating sleep some hours after their parents, can still be in their through of the circadian downswing. Like an animal prematurely wrenched out of hibernation too early, the adolescent brain still needs more sleep and more time to complete the circadian cycle before it can operate efficiently without grogginess. If this remains perplexing to parents, a different way to frame and perhaps appreciate The mismatch is this: asking your teenage son or daughter to go to bed and fall asleep at 10 p.m. is the circadian equivalent of asking you, their parent, to go to sleep at 7 or 8 p.m. No matter how loud you enunciate the order, no matter how much that teenager truly wishes to obey your instructor, and no matter what amount of old effort is applied by either of the two parties, the circadian rhythm of a teenager will not be miraculously coaxed into a change. Furthermore, asking that same teenager to wake up at 7 the next morning and function with intellect, grace, and good mood is the equivalent of asking you, their parent, to do the same at 4 or 5 a.m. Sadly, neither society nor our parental attitudes are well designed to appreciate or accept that teenagers need more sleep than adults, and that they are biologically wired to obtain that sleep at a different time from their parents. It's very understandable for parents to feel frustrated in this way, since they believe that their teenagers' sleep patterns reflect a conscious choice and not a biological edict. But non-volitional, non-negotiable, and strongly biological they are, we parents would be wise to accept this fact and to embrace it, encourage it, and praise it, lest we wish our own children to suffer developmental brain abnormalities or force a raised risk of mental illness upon them. It will not always be this way for the teenager. As they age into young and middle adulthood, the circadian schedule will gradually slide back in time, not all the way back to the time present in childhood, but back to an earlier schedule, one that ironically will lead those same now adults to have the same frustration and annoyance with their own sons or daughters. By that stage, those parents have forgotten or have chosen to forget that they too were once adolescents who desired a much later bedtime than their own parents. You may wonder why the adolescent's brain first overshoots in their advanced circadian rhythm, staying up late and not wanting to wake up until late, yet will ultimately return to an earlier timed rhythm of sleep and waking later adulthood. Though we continue to examine this question, the explanation I propose is a socio-evolutionary one. Central to the goal of adolescent development is the transition from parental dependence to independence, all the while learning to navigate the complexities of peer group relationships and interactions. One way in which Mother Nature has perhaps helped adolescents unbuckle themselves from their parents is to march their circadian rhythms forward in time, past that of their adult mothers and fathers. This ingenious biological solution selectively shifts teenagers to a later phase when they can, for several hours, operate independently and do so as a peer group collective. It is not a permanent or full dislocation from parental care, but a safe an attempt at partially separating soon-to-be adults from the eyes of mother and father. There is risk, of course, but the transition must happen, and the time of day when those independent adolescents' wings unfold and the first solo flights from the parental nest occur is not a time of day at all, but rather a time of night, thanks to a forward shift circadian rhythm. We are still learning more about the role of sleep in development. However, a strong case can already be made for defending sleep time in our adolescent self, rather than denigrating sleep as a sign of laziness. As parents, we are often too focused on what sleep is taken away from our teenagers without stopping to think about what it may be adding. Caffeine also comes into question. There was once an education policy in the US known as No Child Left Behind. Based on scientific evidence, a new policy has recently been suggested by my colleague Dr. Mary Kerskaden. No child needs caffeine.